Argentina struggle for human rights. Who am I? Francisco Madariaga of Argentina was 32 years old before he met his father. As a child, he was raised by a man called Victor Gallo and his wife. Gallo was an intelligence officer at a secret military prison between 1976 and 1983. Gallo's job was to get information about enemies of the government. He would force political prisoners to talk about their opposition to the military government that ruled Argentina. When one of those prisoners gave birth to Francisco Madariaga, the authorities took the baby from the mother and gave the infant to Gallos. They never told Madariaga about his origins. He was raised with the name Alejandro Ramiro Gallo. As an adult, Madariaga asked the woman who raised him about his childhood. She admitted that he had been taken from his real mother while she was in prison. Then, Madariaga went to a human rights group called Grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo. This organization works to find out what happened to people who disappeared under the military dictatorship. With their help, Madariaga was able to meet his real father, Abel. Describing that milestone, he said, "It was the best moment in my life. I couldn't believe how much I looked like him." According to estimates, Madariaga is far from alone. It is believed that hundreds of children were taken from prisoners and given to members of Argentina's security forces. What happened to Madariaga and his parents was part of a period in Argentina history known as the Dirty War. During that period, which lasted from 1976 to 1983, the military government seized thousands of people it suspected of being political opponents. Many of those who were arrested were never heard from again. Decades later, Argentina is still coping with some of the results of the Dirty War. It was not until 2010, for example, that Francisco Madariaga met his real father. In this case study, you will learn what circumstances helped the military government come to power. You will also learn how Argentina continues to recover from this difficult period in its past. Popular appeal, limited freedom. Economic troubles often cause countries to turn to authoritarian or strong and controlling governments. Argentina experienced this effect when a global economic crisis called the Great Depression severely damaged the country's economy. The Great Depression began in 1929. The following year, the military overthrew the elected government. Continuing economic problems and the tensions of World War II prevented Argentina from developing an effective government. In 1943, the military again overthrew the government. 3 years later, Colonel Juan Perón became president. Aided by his popular wife Evita, Perón made changes that helped working people. At the same time, however, he restricted freedoms. After Evita's death in 1952, Perón's military faded. Economic growth slowed again. In 1955, the military exiled Perón or sent him out of the country. The Dirty War. For nearly 20 years, Argentina wavered between military and civilian rule, though neither solved the country's economic problems. Both revolutionary groups and Perón supporters committed acts of terrorism against the government. In 1973, Juan Perón became president again with his third wife, Isabel, serving as vice president. When Perón died in 1974, his widow became the world's first woman president of a country. Economic problems continued as prices rose and unrest spread. In 1976, the military overthrew Isabel Perón and the period known as the Dirty War began. A harsh conservative government imposed censorship, a ban on publications and broadcasts that criticized the country's leadership. The government also tried to wipe out its opponents. Many of those opponents were activists who believed in social change and more evenly distributing power among all the people in Argentina. Other opponents supported labor unions. The military and secret police arrested thousands of people who protested the government's actions. Many of those people disappeared forever. Return to democracy. Relatives of the disappeared demanded to know what had happened to their loved ones. Their efforts brought worldwide attention to human rights abuses in Argentina. By the 1980s, the Argentine people were calling for an end to military rule. Then, in 1982, the Argentine military invaded but failed to hold nearby islands ruled by the United Kingdom. This failure increased anger against the military. The next year, Argentina held democratic elections and returned to civilian rule. The new government restored basic political liberties. Political parties could operate freely in Argentina again. Justice further disappeared. The 1980s brought some setbacks for justice in Argentina. Some laws were passed that protected military officers from punishment for past crimes. Human rights activists continued to demand justice. However, finally, in 2003, Argentina's Congress overturned the laws that granted amnesty or pardon to accused officers. 2 years later, the country's Supreme Court ruled that those laws were unconstitutional. Since then, more than 50 officials have been convicted of crimes during the Dirty War. Investigations into hundreds of other cases continue. Since the end of military rule, Argentina's economy has struggled at times. Its democracy, however, has remained stable, with elections described as generally free and fair by organizations that monitor them. In this environment, citizens may pursue justice as the country seeks to put the Dirty War behind it for good.